You're off. I'm also going to text my fiance and tell her I do not need her to bring my case, my charger. That would have been very unfortunate.
Is that at 132nd and L? Or where's Bildertrand?
Bildertrand's on 120th and I. I live on like 137th and Pacific, so it's like a 20, 25-minute drive depending on the traffic. Cool. Welcome to night 4. I would like to apologize once again from the bottom of my heart for not letting you know about our days off. I don't want to toss Nate under the bus because these are recorded, but that was also news to me that we were getting those days off. So I can't remember who messaged me. Someone messaged me like, hey, are we having class tonight? Because Emily and the data science class upstairs, they got it off for Valentine's Day. I was like, I don't know. So I texted Nate. He said, yeah, we have those off. So apologies, but like 3 days off never hurt out of nowhere, right? That's what I'm telling myself to sleep at night. Yes, we will have it'll be 8 classes. Okay. So we're on night 4 this week. Today's Wednesday, so next night 5 and 6 would be next week, and then 7, 8 the week after that. Okay. Yep. So it does get pushed back a week, which he claims again was in the original plan.
Well, there was no end date.
You guys are stuck forever.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're getting through it. So very exciting night. We have been, I think I mentioned this a few times, like the data science track and the way that they structured these classes and having Tableau and DATEDIFF be first is very intentional because it really is kind of the baseline of all data science, data analytics journey. And it's a really cool, easy way to learn. So the first 3 nights have been really focused on the data visualization side of things. We learned how to build some basic charts, how to get familiar with Tableau, bring in data, find data, but not really working with data too much. We are starting with, I know a couple of you guys last week or 2 weeks ago, we're starting with, well, how do I change my data? I need it to be this instead of that. And so that comes in with calculated field. So we did a calculated field last time with the DATEDIFF function. Very, very easy to do. But we're going to get a little more in-depth analysis of how those function tonight. And tonight will be kind of a good overview of kind of the data engineering aspect of data viz. So how do you take data that you have and change it, work with it? Munge it is one of my favorite buzzwords to say, munging data, which just means twisting it and making it work towards your liking. To then build a visualization. So I know a lot of people have been struggling up to this point with finding data sets that have data ready for them to work with. I'm hoping that after tonight we can be with, okay, this is the data that I have, this is how I want it to look, and this is how we can start actually building off of that. So that will be tonight. We'll go through, this actually isn't everything, calculated fields, some real basic arithmetic, if statements, if any of you guys are familiar with like coding or anything like that. If else statements, DATEDIFF, which we already covered, so that'll be easy. And then level of detail calculations, which is a big Tableau buzzword, but we'll get to that. And then window functions. So it will be a little more on the technical side of things than we've got to up to this point in the past, but it will allow us to really be dangerous moving forward with the visualizations that we make. And as a really good overview and kind of foundation, I think the SQL class is actually next on this track. So a lot of what you learned tonight will be super applicable for the next class. I actually think the instructor of that class is joining us next week. I wish he came tonight and I could have showed off my SQL chops, but we're in it. So storytelling, this is what we did last time. I went through everyone that had sent me their assignment. I picked out 4. I want to make sure you guys are all here. Chris Burma, who is actually not here, so he gets off the hook, but he did message me and say he was going to miss. Connor, Laura, and Maz, you guys all sent me examples that I thought would be really good to show the class, so I'm going to have you guys walk through those here in a second. Before we dive into that, though, I kind of wanted to show you the light at the end of the tunnel. So I've mentioned this a couple different times. My screen is not being shared. Can you not see? Thanks for the heads up, Connor. Can you not see the PowerPoint over here?
Nope. Looks like we got a black screen, at least on my end.
Interesting. Well, the good news is I haven't showed anything cool yet. Let me retry this. Oh, I know exactly why. Present, share screen. And then, okay, how about now? Did that pop up?
Now we're looking good.
Sweet.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Noah, thank you. Cool. So light at the end of the tunnel. I mentioned this a couple times that the final exam or whatever is essentially going to be night 8, and we're going to be building a dashboard that is everything that we've learned up to this point. So this is what mine looked like last year. I envision it's kind of a free-for-all. I'll have some requirements of what you need to build in here, but then it's kind of up to you to make it your own. So this is the one that I made during the class period. The way it works is it's a self-service dashboard. So you see I have the pretty ODSA label up there. I have a few different maps and scatter plots. We'll cover maps, I think, next week. But what's cool about this is you can go in right now. It's showing profit margin by state. As you can see, really good profit margins up in Minnesota, really bad here in Colorado. But you can actually go in here and you can change it to, let's see if we want to see sales. So sales and profit we've worked with before. Profit margin is a new one. Average discount is a new one. So these were all built using calculated fields. Days to ship we did with the date diff last week. Quantity. So you can mess around and show different things here. And what you'll notice is when I'm updating this filter over on this side of the map, it's also updating my scatter plot over on this side. And then even more interactivity, if I want to click into Nebraska specifically, it then filters my scatter plot over here. So I can see the profit margin for state Nebraska. I can click into Texas, profit margin for state Texas. You can see binders are sticking out there. And so you can also, over here in our scatter plot, we have sales on the y-axis, orders on the x-axis. So you can see the total number of sales by orders. You can change that. So if I want my x-axis to be profit and my y-axis to be discount percentage, I can change that, and that automatically updates in this as well too. And same thing, you can do that same filtering. So essentially what I've done is I've built a dashboard that has all the fields plus some additional fields that we would build inside a Tableau, and built it in a self-service dashboard. So this is something you can give your stakeholders and say, hey, if they're curious about the data, but they're not sure what they're curious on, they don't have the Tableau chops to build a Tableau dashboard. So you essentially build them a portal for them to go in and say, hey, if you want to, no matter what you want to compare, you can click in and compare anything here. If you're curious about specific states, you can click in and see different things there. You can even, right now by default, let's go to a better profit sales or something. By default, I'm showing it by subcategory. Maybe they're curious all the way down at the category level. They can click into that. Here's office supplies. Maybe they're curious about specific cities, product name. So you've essentially built kind of a middle ground between, I know how to do this in Tableau, you don't. You want to dive into the data, you can't do it in Tableau. I will build you a portal to do it. So I thought it was important to cover what we're working towards before we get into calculated fields tonight, because I think it will help connect the dots on why do I need to know this? I thought this was a data viz class. It will allow you to build out some really cool, powerful things like that. So I will drop this link in the chat if you guys want to mess around with that. Honestly, if you wanted to work ahead, you could come in night 8 and just show me this and leave right away too. I don't care. But this will be kind of what we are building. So let me drop that in the chat. Any questions or comments, concerns, anything about this?
Will we be using Superstore data for our tests, or do we?
I think so. If there was such thing as extra credit or a GPA in this class, I could say you can use your own data set for extra credit. But I think for the sake of simplicity and making sure that we all are, I could come over and answer questions and know what you're working with, and we don't spend 2 hours looking for a data set that works or whatever. I'll say Superstore is totally okay to use. But if you found something up to this point that you're using for all your homework, I think you actually have found a pretty good data set that you've been going back and forth on. More than okay to use something like that. Any other questions? Cool. With that, then, we will get into the storytelling portion. I'm just going to go by order that I have the tabs open here. Connor, I'm going to pull yours open. And if you don't mind, you don't need to share your screen. I'll be your mouse and hover over here, but kind of walking us through I chose yours because it's a really interesting data set, and I thought it did a really good job of actually pulling in all these different charts that we had requested. So I'd love for you to walk through this.
Yeah, absolutely. Didn't realize I was being put on the spot tonight. All right. So the data set I used is from Spotify, and it's essentially going through different genres as well as popularity and some other things. So specifically with the first chart, we did popularity by key. So on the x-axis, is that correct? Hopefully that's, sorry. Genre column, I went through all of the genres of songs, and then across the top, it's listing out the keys, and it's giving us numbers of how many songs in these genres are using this key. Then move over to the highlighted table, where made that look a little bit nicer. And then popularity versus tempo by genre. I was essentially trying to find a set of numbers that worked with each other, so that way, the line wasn't too far above or below the bars. But what I was able to come up with was the genres and how popular they are and what tempo they're using. And I believe I can't remember. I wish I had this pulled up. But and then it was the next set, the pie chart, and that was just using simply, is it minor or major, or what in this case they called it mode. But then you can see it makes up. I took the attribute danceability and was able to find out, okay, out of the songs and their danceability, is it more of the major chord that is used to be a danceable song, or is it more of the minor chord that's used to be a danceable song? Hopefully that kind of elaborates a little bit. I haven't looked at this data set since last week. I apologize.
No, this is awesome. And I apologize for putting you on the spot, but you did a great job. I just saw this, and this is something that I had never worked with before or seen it. I thought, you made a good viz when you look at it and you have like 20 more questions about it. But like, this is something that I would love to dive into more. So the danceability, that was like a column or like a field that came with the data set?
Yes.
Yeah, that's sweet. Makes sense. I actually don't know anything about music, so I guess I don't know if it makes sense or not, but
I know a very little bit.
And then like the popularity versus tempo is really interesting too. This would be a cool one to see if we had it like trended over time, like to see if jazz or the opera or some of these that like lower tempo songs, maybe that has changed as we as a society have changed. I also think it would be cool, and we'll cover how to do this maybe tonight if we get time. Tableau has really built in like data science functions, like how much are these correlated to each other? How can we forecast them over time? I think it'd be sweet to toss these in there and see like, is popularity correlated with tempo, and has that changed over time? So really, really good work here. I thought this was an awesome example to show.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate it.
Cool. Up next, being put on the spot, Laura, if you don't mind. And you'll probably have to come up here just because the microphone is on the laptop.
Okay. It's hard to remember what we built.
I know, it's been months.
It does feel that way. Okay, so I've been using a DEI data set. This is the type of data that I work with on a regular basis. So looking at demographics of a company as well as their perceptions of the company overall. So first, I wanted to understand the inclusivity scores. So whether or not a culture is viewed as inclusive. And I wanted to look at the intersectionality of gender by race, ethnicity. So are there differences in scores based on that intersectional identity? So kind of hard to tell in this table, but when we look over here, we see that individuals who identified as an other gender, so not male, female, non-binary, they chose their own category that wasn't listed, and who identified as Latina, scored very low on the perception of inclusivity, as did individuals who identified as Middle Eastern and non-binary. and those who identified as Latin and transgender. Those who identified as other and other scored really high, which is interesting. Kind of clearly a fake data set based on that. But yeah, I thought that those scores were really interesting. And then I overlaid sexual orientation with perception of the organization valuing diversity and equal opportunity. So here we have the different categories of sexual orientation. So the higher order category is, yes, I identify as LGBTQ+. No, I do not, and I prefer not to say. And then there was a separate category that identified each individual identity. And so some people who said they prefer not to say whether or not they identify as LGBTQ+, did identify another identity later on. But yeah, anyway, the scores looked like individuals who identified as heterosexual and homosexual, as well as preferred not to say, had the highest scores, whereas those who identified as bisexual or other had the lowest scores. So. And then finally, I just looked at the makeup of those who identified as LGBTQ+, and the majority of individuals at this fake organization do not, whereas about, I don't know, main point is the majority do not.
Perfect pie chart, yeah. Perfect pie chart example right there. This is sweet. We didn't do claps for Connor. I'm sorry. Claps for Connor first. And then snaps for Laura too. What I love about this, one, I think the data set is really, really interesting. Two, I think you did a really good job of using the pie chart for the right reason, using the title, which Connor did as well too. This actually sparked my thought to show you guys kind of the end data set that we're working towards, because I think this would be a really cool one to be able to interact with between the two, especially because you have different categories up here that you don't have down below. So seeing how those intersect, you run out of room to put everything on a chart, but filtering one and updating the other one would be a really cool kind of self-service data set. I also like that you have the counts somewhere on here. I think a lot of times, especially with working a fake data set, or a lot of times when you're working with data sets that aren't as big as you would like them to be, sometimes you kind of get lost of okay, is this an actual conclusion or is it just a small sample size? So being able to see, okay, well, we have about 10,000 people making up this data set that you can see from the pie chart here. But then you see, okay, well, we only have about 648 that prefer not to say. So take some of these with a grain of salt because it's not a super big data set. That was another thing I wanted to call out there. So really good job there as well. And then last but not least, Maz, if you don't mind coming up. This one I just thought had really pretty colors.
Yeah.
And I wanted to highlight that.
Yeah. Well, got a little groovy with the colors. All right, let's see what I did.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I used the COVID-19 data set, and I decided to look more at, our region. So I looked at the North American continent, so Canada, the United States, and then most of Central America. And then I looked at cases by, the World Health Organization region, just how it's classified. Here it was kind of interesting to see, right, where COVID cases concentrated, or another indication might have tested really well as well. It does create a couple more questions out of the images. The bottom left, we looked at people that had recovered versus people that unfortunately had died across the different WHO regions as well. And then finally, the actual percentages of those different WHO regions, mainly the death of those cases, or people that had died, unfortunately. But yeah, I got a little creative with the color scheme and tried to keep it in somewhat similar. It was Valentine's Day, so I tried to keep it in the reds.
There you go. I love light.
Yeah, but that's pretty much it. Yeah. Any questions?
No. That's good.
Cool. Awesome.
Snaps. Cool. Yeah, I think you did a really good job here of not overcomplicating things. I mean, a simple table can just be 2 columns here. Nice. This actually does a really good job, even though it's 1 row of data with the color scheme drawing your attention to where it needs to be. I actually like that you have with the pie chart here, there's not quite too many things where you still easily see the slices, but instead of having to hover, having the labels on there, I thought was a good use case as well too. So yeah, all in all, very good job. And 3 very different data sets that the dashboards all looked very similar because that's what we were trying to do. So I thought that was cool as well.
It is quite challenging finding the correct data set.
Right.
Yeah, to fit whatever chart you're trying to do.
That's also interesting enough to like keep your attention to build something for.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also love that you kind of pushed yourself to update the color scheme. A lot of people ask me like what I do for kind of continued education. Like in my first few years, I got to go to like Tableau conference and I took classes and stuff like that. But really how I learn now, once you kind of get the fundamentals of Tableau, is having an idea or seeing something that somebody else did and then just going, I wonder if I can figure out how to do that on myself. So that's another reason I like kind of the sharing part of this class is you're able to see, color schemes. I hadn't thought of that before. Or, here's pie charts for this. So always like be looking at other people's visualizations that they made and figure out ways that you can steal them and look just as smart as them. Cool. Let's get into the meat and potatoes here. So like I said, in kind of my preview here, up to this point, I've been heavily focused around charts and vizzes. We can only build charts with data that we have to work with. Often the data that we need is missing or in the wrong format. One of the most powerful features of Tableau is the ability to create calculated fields. Level of detail calculations are essentially calculated fields on steroids. We will cover both of those today. I actually think the complaint about or the commentary around like it's hard to find a good data set that works for this is actually pretty applicable to real life and the workforce. Like, gosh, data is just messy always. And I feel like every time like I have a new project and I want to dive into something, I'll like start building out my charts and I'll be like, well, this data isn't working. And I'll look in and be like, okay, well, this is like an open text field. Like I'm going to have to clean this up, or, there's actually a bug in our platform and this data isn't coming in correctly. So then you have to work with the dev team to make sure that that's properly articulated. Next week is actually the International Builder Show, which is the largest construction conference in the world, which Builder Trend will be going to. I got to go last year. It was sweet, except I still had to teach this class. So while everyone was going out to dinner, I came back and talked about data viz. But let's actually pull that up real quick because I think it's a cool example. One of the things, and I promise I'm going somewhere with this ramble, that they do is they have like a sales leaderboard. I'm actually not going to share this until I have it open because I don't need to show you everything. And so that people can see how many people are getting to sign up for our software at the floor, and there's a leaderboard and people get paid out and it's a whole big thing. This is what the data set that I built looked like last year. And you can see like already there's a couple like charts that you guys know how to make. So this is like very real world applicable stuff. This is how many total deals they signed up. We have 3 packages, essential, advanced, or complete. This is how many in each came in each one of those. You can sign up on a monthly or annual deal. That's how many annual deals we had. And then here's the individual reps and how many deals that they closed over the course of the show. Where I was coming from is in order to attribute which like deals came from which reps, they have to enter in their initials, which you think would be an easy enough ask to just put like CV net every time you sign something up. And that's how I was able to tie it out like to their names. But there was like probably of the 192, I'd say a dozen or so. I like came in, I'm like, hey, this one says CAH. Did you mean CH? And you have to like go in and manually fix it, which is the worst. This is just how that trended over time. So like these are hourly signups. So you can see like the morning's really busy. Obviously no one signs up over midnight. morning. There's a nice dual axis chart that you guys can make, and then the different sales by state. So I promise that even though it may seem like things that we're learning right now are really simple, it doesn't take a whole lot to take that simple learnings and put it into something that's actually usable. So I will show, yeah.
You built that once it was over, or was that like coming in?
That was live. So I built it. I had like I had an idea of where all the data lived, but data didn't actually start coming in until we like got to the show and they started closing deals. So the first 2 hours of the show, once they started closing deals, I built that out real quick. And then essentially every rep had it up like on their laptop throughout the day so they could track where they were at, moving up and down like the leaderboard. And then
Is your Tableau just like plugged into your platform then?
another great question. Yeah. So we will cover that. Let me check. I feel like I promised we'll cover that next week a couple times. So let me actually figure out the exact night we're going to cover that. We will cover connecting to live data sources. Next week. We are going to do it using a simple, what is it called? Google Sheets or something like, right? Google Sheets. Where up to this point, we've done just Excel and CSVs and things like that. So it's kind of static data. We will connect to Google Sheets. And as you update data in Google Sheets, Tableau will actually pull in that live data and update real time. So that data set that you saw was connected. We use SQL Server as our backend for our platform. But anytime that data was populated, automatically updated in Tableau. So we'll build out a mini version of that using Google Sheets. And as you update it in Google Sheets, it'll automatically populate in Tableau, which is always kind of fun to do too. Actually, if you went into one of your Excels right now and like changed data and then like saved it, your Tableau would populate as well. It's just typically not what you do. But yeah, great question. Cool. And then I kind of touched on this as well too, is like Tableau does a really good job of teaching you how to be what I call full stack data scientists. The data science like career is beginning to get more verticalized, where you like at Buildertrend, we actually have data viz specialists that all they do is build Tableau charts. You have data engineers, you have data scientists, you have data analysts, you have business analysts. So you're beginning to get like, you can really specialize in one specific area. But about 5 years ago, I would consider most like small Omaha data science shops full stack data scientists, where you kind of have to know everything. And I think Tableau does a really good job of teaching you, here's how you get the data, here's how you mess with the data, here's how you analyze the data, here's how you visualize the data, kind of the full spectrum here. So tonight's going to be really heavily focused on kind of that first entry point of the data science process, which is the data engineering side of things. Cool, let's get into it. Can you guys see? Let me go full screen. So basic arithmetic calculated field. This is, I showed you how to make a calculated field last week. We have profit, we have sales. Everyone's familiar with those. If we wanted to create a profit margin calculated field, really simple, profit divided by sales. Let me actually show this live instead. You don't have to worry about following along, but I just think it's easier to go through Tableau instead of a PowerPoint. All right. So if we wanted to create a calculated field for profit margin, we go up to our little arrow here, we go calculated field. And again, don't worry about following along. We're going to title this profit margin. And we're just going to go profit divided by sales. Now we have that new calculated field created. If we want to look at what our profit margin is for each order, we can bring in our order IDs, bring in our profit margins, let's just show this as a table to make it simple. And then I think I've walked through how to do this before, but this is obviously supposed to be a percent. So if I go to profit margin and go default properties, number format, we can change that to a percentage. And there we go. Now we have profit margin. So the main type of calculated field that we're going to be using is just basic arithmetic like this. And we have a brand new data point in our data set, which is cool enough as it is. But we have to understand what I'm going to call level of detail, which really is, there's no better way to describe it other than the name of it, is the level that you want this stuff aggregated at. So right now the level is individual orders. So the level of detail that we're showing this calculated field in is at the order level. However, say I want to show this profit margin field, and instead of by individual orders, I want to see the profit margin for categories. Now all of a sudden our profit margin calculated field does not appear to be functioning correctly. Does anyone have any idea of what's happening here or why it's looking the way it is?
Maybe because we don't know the costs of those things. So measure against the profit.
Close, close. So let's go ahead and bring in, let's go like profit, sales, profit margin, it's a table. Okay, so remember our calculated field that we just created called profit margin, let's go ahead and look at that again, is just profit divided by sales. And the way to think about calculated fields is essentially this is if you're visualizing in Excel and you have all your columns, we created a new column that is profit divided by sales. Now we're aggregating that and looking at the total sum of the profit margin. So here I actually have a nice little example in my PowerPoint that I'll bring over. So this is what it looks like in our data now. We have a profit column, we have a sales column, and we created a new column called profit margin. This one's 50%, this one's 40%. When we bring that over and we're taking the sum of the profit margin, that's at the level of individual orders. Now we're going and summing up that entire column. So it's taking 50%, 40% and aggregating those all together, which is where we get these huge profit margin percentages, which no longer make sense. So understanding the level at which we're calculating things is really important. So if we were showing this at the order level, it worked fine. If we want to show it at the category level, we can go in, we can edit our calculated field, and let's do sum profit divided by sum sales. And now hit OK. Whoops, it broke, but that's okay. So now we can look at, here's our sum of our profit, right? 18,000. Here's the sum of our sales, 742,000. And now our profit margin calculation is just looking at that sum of profit, that 18,000 divided by our sum of sales, our 742,000, to give us the profit margin for that category. So the level of detail that we're operating now is now at the category level. Does that make sense, the distinction between the two? Okay, I am so sorry. I'm seeing your guys' messages. Okay, just a minute ago, so you didn't miss much. Let me reshare my screen.
I got a little lost when everything changed to measured values.
Yeah. Okay, can you guys see the screen now? Cool. Thank you much. Yeah, you don't really need to worry about following along too much right now.
Oh.
Does the concept make sense at least?
I think so.
Yeah.
am not connecting one dot. So the calculated field is at the order level. How do we know what the calculated field is at when we're doing that? Is it like, in terms of the data that I work with, would it be like the participant ID would be the level that it always calculates from?
Yeah, that's a
Or-
great question. So just repeating the question so you guys can hear it. Essentially is how do you know what level the calculated field is at when you begin to create it? Using the order ID was probably a bad way to phrase it. It's essentially at the row level. So in your data set, because you could have multiple rows for multiple orders, so that's not necessarily true. But just like in Excel or in this like PowerPoint example, in your raw data set, when you create a calculated field, every single row is going to be populated with that field. In fact, if I go over to Tableau and look at my data source, I believe it will show, yeah, so here's my normal data. When you create calculated fields, and again, I'm just over my data source tab, here's your normal data as you're used to seeing it. Any fields that you create will be over on the side here. So here you can see our profit margin field at the row level.
When we created that field, is there a way, I might have missed the step, to change it to percentage?
Yep. So the question is just how do we make sure that's showing as a percentage? In the little drop down on the green pill here, if you just hit default properties, number format, you should be able to choose percentage. So now that we created it this way, sum of profit divided by sum of sales, it's going to aggregate whatever I have, whatever dimension I want to aggregate by, because it's going to take the sum of profit, the sum of sales, and divide those. So if I were to bring in country here, sum of profit, sum of sales, here's my profit margin. If I were to bring in product name here, add all the members. It doesn't necessarily matter because I said in my calculated field that I want to do the sum them before dividing them. In fact, I could even bring in my original order ID. And even though each one of these is only one row in the back-end data set, it's still going to take the total sum of this row, this order ID, the total sum of this row, which is sales, and aggregate those together into the profit margin. Melinda, makes sense? You look.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Okay. We'll continue to get some different examples up here.
Really quickly.
Yeah.
How does it switch to measured names? Or maybe I just missed that as well.
Yeah, so the way I got to the measured names up here, if you want, I'll show you two ways to do it. So the easy way that I always do it is I bring in just like everything I want to see up here, and I get this like really ugly chart to start with. Sorry. And then I just say table, and it automatically does it in the show me. If you wanted to build it from scratch, what I would call the correct way to do it is you would bring in category here. And then remember, I think we touched on these last week. By default, Tableau gives you these two, this automatic dimension and this automatic measure, which is just measure names. This is just saying your column names up here. So if you want to bring in multiple ones of these instead of just one specific one, you can pull this over. And then you can bring in measure values here and toss it on there. And now every single value that we have.
Oh, okay. Just give it to.
Yep. So we don't care about the count of orders. We don't care about this. We don't care about that.
Cool.
Same thing. Yep. Great questions so far into this beautiful Wednesday night. I don't necessarily love talking for 3 hours straight, so keep the questions up. Okay. So say I want to show, let's go back to our one here. the average profit margin across our different categories. So let's bring categories back onto here. I have, on a whole, I have the profit margin for the furniture sales here. Let's say I want to see what the average is across our order IDs here. So not necessarily weighted by how much each one of them are, but what the average is. We are now going to we're going to think through, and I'll show you why I started with the example that I started with. I want to show, let's call this summed profit margin. The first one that I had created, remember, was just profit divided by sales. What do we want to call this? Plain. Let's pull our category back in there. May change this to a percent again. Okay, so here's the two different ways that we had done this, right? Is this one is we're summing it up. So we're taking the total sum for each of these categories, total sales, and then dividing it. The first one I showed you, and you're probably wondering, why did you show us this? If the right way to do it is with the sum. Here it is just the profit divided by just the sales. So these are our two different options that we have. If I wanted to see the average, see how here it's doing sum of the plain profit margin. I can change that from a sum to an average. And now I have the average profit margin. So let's think through what we're doing here. Why is this one 2.49? Why is this one 3.88? Let's look at our data here. So at the row level here, you can see that these are exactly the same, because right now the level that we're calculating at in the raw data set is just row by row. So it's going to take, this one is taking the sum of the profit, the sum of the sales, and dividing them. This one's just taking the profit, just taking the sales. So on a row by row level, they're not the same. Or I mean, on the row by row level, they're exactly the same. However, when I bring them up and I want to aggregate them on a different basis, this one is taking the total sum of sales, total sum of profit, and showing that as an aggregate. AGG just means it's already aggregated. We already have the sums in there. This one is taking row by row what the profit is, row by row what the sales is, and dividing them. And then I'm averaging up those individual rows. Does that make sense, the distinction between the two? If it doesn't, that's fine.
Yeah.
So the summed profit margin, gosh dang, I keep clicking to the wrong thing. Right now, the level that we're looking at is just the category. So it's going to take all the sum, all the profit, and divide those two. So I think we're all aligned on that one. That's easy. This one, the plain profit margin, is just taking for each row, profit divided by sales, and then I'm averaging all those. So I'm getting the average profit margin right here. Whereas the other one, I'm not actually doing my calculation until I first go in and sum all the sales, sum all the profit, and then divide them.
Okay, so what is it averaging if it's just looking at 18,000, 42,000? What else is
Great question.
average there?
Yep. So this one, the one that we sum first, is looking at these two high-level numbers and then doing the 2.49. What this one is doing is actually, it's not looking at the total sum. It's still looking at each individual row. Another way to show this would be, let's do like category, profit, sales, order ID instead. And let's just grab like a few of these. If I pull in our plain profit margin, so this is what the data looks like in the back. This is exactly what our raw data looks like. I just only kept 5 of them to make the example easier. It is going to take the profit divided by sales for this specific row, give our profit margin, which is 29%. And then it's going to take this one, give our profit margin 17.5, this one, give our profit margin of 35. And it's averaging all of these columns. Whereas the other way is summing all of these, summing all of those, and then dividing those sums. So it's just the order at which they're operating at.
Okay, so for that last, for your original example,
Mhm.
can you switch it back from average to sum
Yep.
for me?
Yeah. That's actually, that's a really good way to look at it.
Okay, so it stayed the same.
This one stayed the same, yep, because
Okay.
we're doing the summing at the level of the category already, and then dividing those two sum numbers, one thing.
Okay.
This one has, however many rows that we have in here, 9,000 rows. And each one of those rows has this profit margin field. And before, when we said it wasn't working, it's because we were looking at the sum of all those rows. Whereas if we change this to the average, now it's going to look at the average of all those rows. We'll keep going. Great questions. I don't think we're quite there yet based on the looks on the faces here. Another way to look at it here is Tableau has this really nice feature. I don't know if you saw me bring it in or not, but I'll create a new one.
I mean, this might be a silly question, but is it very similar to the properties of like Excel?
Exactly like Excel.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah, just order of operation.
Yep.
I'm trying to figure out when it's not as obvious as that, how do I double check and make sure
Right.
I'm calculating
Yeah,
the
right. What's the
right
QA
way?
Yeah.
process on like these numbers with this data?
No, yeah, that's great questions. And there's definitely things like I'll look at. I'll be like, hey, are you sure that you're doing this the right way? So if we were just looking at, this is what our plain data set looks like. Each one of these is a row. This is exactly what I pulled in from over here. Tableau is this really nice feature. We'll cover it at some point, I'm sure. Up here, there's an analytics pane that has, I had mentioned this, I think to Connor, where you can have like trend lines and forecasts and really cool fancy things. Right now, I'm just going to bring over the totals. So this is just summing up everything that we're looking at right here. So profit, sales, plain profit. This is what our raw data set looks like. If we were to sum up all these profit margins, that's what we would get. That's the same thing as that 8,000 number or whatever we were looking at before. If I want to look at, instead of summing all these, if I want to average all of those, that's what we're doing, is we're taking each individual row and averaging the profit margin for them.
And like you were saying, for like the level of detail, if you are working with like specific individual IDs, you could probably do a simple profit divided by sales. But if you're going across multiple categories or multiple sales, et cetera, you'd have to consider doing either an average or a sum and then doing more math.
Right.
So that's how this correlates to what you choose to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a really good way to phrase it, is understanding I think the biggest thing to understand is when you create a calculated field, you are creating it at an individual. For every single row, you now have a new data point. And if we were to just bring in, if we didn't create that field and we were just looking at it and it was like 29%, 17%, we would know that obviously if we sum all those up, that's not going to be the true profit margin. We'd have to do the sum of each individual category first and then get a category profit margin. So that's the level. Knowing once you start aggregating stuff, the row by row level doesn't necessarily make as much sense. But like anything, we will get some reps and we'll get some practice, and it will begin to make sense. Anybody online have any questions or want me to repeat anything that we've gone through up to this point? Cool. I actually love how you guys are using the chat. This is working really well for me, so I appreciate it. Cool. We are going to get into, let's go and take our break now. I think we need a brain break after the arithmetic stuff. We'll cover if-else statements and date diffs next. The date diffs will be easy because we've already covered those. But the if-else stuff is fairly straightforward. And then we'll go through some more examples of level of detail stuff, which I think will help really drive home the point we're trying to make. I'm just looking ahead if there's anything else we should cover now. No, I think we're good. Okay, let's be back at 7:07, which is exactly 10 minutes from now. Oh. And I did put in a new snack order for Nate.
Awesome. Oh.
Okay, I can't get one of mine to switch to average when it's in the, were you able to switch them back and forth to average once they're in the measure values? Both of them?
Margin. Well, one of them's already summed, right? In the short answer, no. I don't think I figured.
Oh, I think I know what my issue is that I'm still on order number. Like a category. Nope, that's not my problem.
So when it's summed, right? It's at 8,225%,
Uh-huh.
and then you said, I think it's the plain profit margin that we average, right?
Plain profit margin, when it's summed, it's at the 8,000.
Yeah.
So wasn't he switching both of them back and forth between sum and average?
That's a good question.
That's it. Yeah.
How's it on, like the average and the sum ones? I just kind of misread.
I don't think.
Like,
Sorry.
that's the plain
plain,
one, yeah.
yeah.
So he like added some in there, right? Like,
So yeah, if you did sum.
after.
Oh, and then so you want that sales warranty to do with the A and B and yeah. Profit and then hit what's it called?
Oh, there, okay. I was like, it had brackets though. That's what I was like
Yeah.
not understanding. Okay, got it.
And if you just
Now that
typed
makes
it
sense.
in without like actually choosing it, then it wouldn't.
Like that.
Yeah, and it looks like you might be missing a closed parenthesis for profit after the bracket.
Oh, it's so it's a.
You want both of them.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Excuse me, sorry.
Okay.
Just need to be.
So that's for the average one, and so the average takes each order and averages it, and then the summed one
So this is
sums the profit, sums the sales.
still profit margin, not the average yet. So this
This is
doing
the summed
same
one.
thing, yeah.
Yeah, that's the summed one. Okay. The average one.
So then the average you actually change here, you don't build out the average in there.
Oh,
You could. Yeah,
okay, so when you do
I did that really confidently. I
Yeah, we're like, yeah, of course you can.
in here. Or no?
So this is my problem. This one, I
What is it? So
The
there's
plane.
something profit. I think you go to
Oh,
measure,
measure
yeah,
and then average.
were you able to do that with the aggregated one?
I don't think so.
No.
I didn't. I don't, no, that's not an option.
Okay. That was.
Yeah.
Average. And so therefore it already is the average.
That's,
So if, okay, so here's where I
The
want to know
things
for my
that you
future.
said, I'm not just repeating it.
Will someone say, Linda, can you make a chart that shows the average of profits and sales for each order? And this is where my anxiety comes in. If someone says, make a thing that doesn't average or whatever, okay, but if you're like, find this information, and I'm like, wow, I don't want to get that information. So that's my question. In this job, will people tell you how to like put together?
Great question. No. Or they'll tell you the wrong thing.
Generally the wrong thing.
Well, you get a general objective, like, this is what we need to be able to see. And then perhaps I can determine the best way to show that.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah, I feel like usually I get a question of like, I want to know
okay,
this, and then
okay.
I pull together a
Okay,
possible
just-
answer for that, and then they say, no, I want to know it for these people, and I'll be like, oh, okay.
Okay,
And really, I don't want to know what the answer to that specific thing is. I want to know the answer to like overall. So yeah, that's what I get a lot.
okay. I just don't want someone, my biggest fear is like, can you just give us some data, like it's not just, because that used to happen when I was doing like UX work. They're like, can you just give us some data on visiting the site? I'm like, first of all, I'm not a data scientist. You have the cards for that, you never use them. B, what do you want to know? There's a lot of things to tell you. It just, I don't like open it.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah.
I don't know. I'm just,
Also, I answered that question, and you are internal to organizations, so you might have a very different answer.
Oh no. Getting stakeholders to tell you what they want and actually mean what they mean is one of the most like difficult things to have to deal with. I'm getting better at it now. It's a process, especially like when you're new to a data science type role. They're like, everyone thinks they're really smart and they're like, we want to see this. And then you build out exactly that. Then you're presenting it to them. They're like, well, this isn't what I wanted. And it's like, well, it's what you asked for. So like, it's actually a really important step, like in the, similarly, like building an app or designing a website is like, you have to really sit down and get like the requirements and specs really thoroughly flushed out before you start diving into something like this. Because one of my favorite phrases in the world is like, words mean things. And if you ask me for the average profit margin, I'm going to build you the average profit margin. Now, you may have actually meant what's our total profit margin across this category, but that's not what you asked me for. Right. So trying to figure out like, what are you trying to do with this data? And it's like, oh, well, we're trying to see like, where should we invest, or maybe where we need to cut costs or something like that. It's like, oh, then you can come in and be like, what I think would actually be better to look at is if you were to split it out this way and this way. Average profit margin may not make sense because you could have a $2 thing here that you're getting 200% profit margin on, and that's going to weight your average profit margin by 2,000%, right? But if you were to look at your total sales and your total profit and then show total profit margin instead of average profit margin, that will give you a better distinction of, hey, you're making 15% on technology and only 13% on office supplies or something like that. So no, people won't always tell you what they want, and if they do, they're normally wrong.
Like some semblance of like, oh, this is what I need to put together.
Then another kind of like tip I use is we worked in sprints and like 2-week sprints where people would give us like, this is what we need you to do. We'd go away for 2 weeks, we'd come back and we'd present it. And we called it a sprint showcase. And when people feel like they're being presented to, they're very, very, especially if you're working with like product or like engineering people, they're very, very inquisitive of like, why is this showing that way? And they just love to try to like pick it apart. So like something really simple of just like changing that from being called a sprint showcase to like a workshop or a 2-week check-in or something like that. You pull up, you're like, hey, this is what I put together. Is this what you guys were expecting? And then they'd be like, oh, wow, this is great. But like, do you think we can see it this way and this way? And you'd be like, yeah, I can show it that way. And it's just, I mean, that's just classic like agile or waterfall like development framework. It's like check in sooner, see if it like they agree with what you're building out. So then your like lost cost is only 2 days because you checked in after 2 days, as opposed to going 2 weeks and then being like, sorry, you got me on a little bit of a rant there. Hot topic issue.
So draining to like checking. Like, I don't have time, just finish it. And
then right.
Like, why did it work? I'm not going to spend 10 hours perfecting it if you're not going to use it. This is a concept.
And then you get into like some classic like hashtag process of, now we have like a really formal data request form. It used to be like, you just Teams me. I'm actually not on the data science team anymore. But you just Teams me. I'd build it out, whatever. Now you have to like go out. You have to fill out a ticket. It's like, what do you want to see? Why are you wanting to see it? What are you hoping to do with that data? Explain to me the use case. Like, what would be the benefit of having this data? What would be the risk of not having this data? And by the time they like go through all that, typically you can figure out this is why they need it. And what they're asking for is not going to solve their why. And then that eliminates the ability to have to like go back and forth. Yeah, force them.
So, where are these companies? I want to work for these companies. Never been able to.
Well, I mean, a lot of times, I guess I've worked at one company full time, interned a lot, but like a lot of people that I talk to don't have processes like that in place already. So you can come in and like be a superhero and be like, hey, we're going to make you fill out a form. If the result of a form means they get a super cool dashboard though, then you start getting some buy-in.
Would you mind showing the calculated field, how you did this on profit margin? Mine is not calculating, and I'm not sure what I missed.
Okay, I will. Sorry. No, give me 1 second. I'm going to remove, I figured out how to put, I'll show you guys, a fancy banner across my stream there, which I'm pretty proud about. So let me remove that real quick. Hide current banner. Let me share my screen. Cool. So you were asking for
Some. Okay, so some. Okay. Is it supposed to be in lowercase? Is that?
no, it shouldn't matter.
Okay. It just comes up as 0 when it calculates. Oh, so switch it to. Probably.
Mm.
This is the aggregate one.
Yes. And then go into the overview. Right here. Default properties or change data type?
Default properties.
No number format. Okay, I remember you talking about that, and then.
I
Okay.
was just struggling with that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Okay, I actually think I had this idea when I was going to the bathroom upstairs. We're gonna do it live to see if it works. I actually think maybe building out that same example in Excel might be a better way to visualize it. Visually learn it, not visualize the data. And I think Tableau potentially is adding a layer of obscurity that we don't need. So let's just do something real simple. Let me make this really big so everyone can see. And let's do category, actually, order ID. Yeah, something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for good measure. And let's just go tables. Honestly, these are probably good enough. Random data. Gosh, coming up with fake data is so hard to do for some reason. Okay, so here's our fake data set. Let's create, this is essentially what we're doing. We're creating a new calculated field. We're going to create profit margin, and it's just going to be equal to profit divided by sales. It will make a percentage. So this is what we did the first time, just simple profit, simple sales. Now, if I wanted to see what that profit margin was, not just for this row, but for tables or chairs, right? I would have to do something like tables equals sum, right? This one, this one, this one, this one. And then, and again, you guys don't need to be following along. I can tell you are. Right, so if I wanted to get, here's my profit margin for each row. But if I want to get what's my total profit margin, well, first I have to understand for tables, what's my total profit, right? So here's just for each tables, just adding those all together. And same thing as it's doing in Excel as it's doing in Tableau, it's just summing those all together. And then if I want to do sales, I'm summing these all together. And then this is my same exact calculation, just profit divided by sales to get 20%. If I didn't do that and sum them first and just try to do this calculation and sum this calculation, this would be equal to summing our profit margin for all of our tables, right? And that's what's going to give that our big percentage.
Can you click on the 20%?
Yep. So this is just taking the sum of profit and the sum of sales and dividing them. This is taking the sum of our profit margin. So understanding the distinction between, I think, Laura, that you said it best, like the order of operations is what really matters. However, if I wanted the average, I would do average of. So here I do want it aggregated at the row level first and then average it out. And here the difference is a lot bigger between summing them first, summing them at the table level first and then dividing them versus dividing them at the row level and then averaging them. Okay. We'll continue to get examples, but I had this idea, like I said, during the break, and I wanted to show it out in Excel. Because I think if someone had asked you to do that in Excel, it'd be pretty easy of what you needed to do. And I think Tableau is just complicating it a little bit. But we'll get some reps and we'll learn. And I'm sure in like 10 minutes, I'm going to wish I saved this. But you guys are all watching me not save it. And I'm sure I'll regret that. Okay, so next calculated field that we're going to cover, we're going to get away from profit margins and order of operations into something I think is a little more fun, which is an if statement. So an if statement, you use in coding, you use in SQL, you use in Python, you use in every like type of development or programming class ever. We're going to learn about it in Tableau. So I actually have a good, let me make this full screen, example to go walk through each part of an if statement. So what this is showing, these are all the basic parts of an if statement. And we're just going to go through them one by one. You start with, obviously, if. And then you need to enter in a statement that will either be true or false. So right here I'm saying is if subcategory equals tables. What this is going to do, we'll kind of stick on the same vein as the last one, is for every single row, look at if the subcategory equals tables and return either true or false. If it's true, so if subcategories equals tables, it does, then this is what you want it to return. So here we're going to say return blue, else return gray. So this is what it returns if true, blue. This is what if it returns it's false, gray, and then end. So I think we're going to go ahead and actually pull up, again, Excel. And I don't need the same example, I promise. So it's fine. We'll do something real simple. Let's say our category is tables, chairs, blah, 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 tables. Let's make this really big. So if I was making an if statement, what it's going to do is it's going to go row by row and say if, what was the example I used? Category equals tables. So it's going to check if this equals tables, then, right? Then return blue. Else, that means it didn't equal tables, return gray. So it would check here and say categories equals tables. I return blue. Check this. Does this equals tables? No. Return gray. Return gray. Return gray. This one equals tables again. Return blue. So I'm creating a new column, just like in the example before this. And I'm telling it to either return blue or gray based on what the category is. So let's see it in action. Let's go to, let's use the same exact example I use in Excel, which is actually subcategory. Sales, and let's make this a pretty bar chart. Whoops. Okay, so say I want to highlight chairs. Is this my biggest one? 328, 499, 330. No, phones is actually my biggest one. So say we wanted to highlight phones being our largest sales. I'm going to create a calculated field, and I'm going to write out exactly what we just did. If subcategory, let's make this bigger, sorry.
Because it's a calculated field?
Yep. Equals, and again, in programming languages, you always use two equal signs. Syntax. Equals, what did I just say we were going to do? Phones. Then blue, else gray. And then the very last, whenever you're done, toss in an end. And then you'll know you messed up if Tableau gives you a squiggly or like a little squiggly red line, a little error here. Sometimes it'll try to tell you what you need to do, expects end to match if. You know you got it right if at the bottom it says the calculation is valid. So we're going to call this like subcategory color. So before we do anything with this, let's go ahead and just check that. Let's bring in all our orders, add them all our subcategories, and then this new field subcategory color. So you can see now this is a new field that we created. This one is phones, it says blue. This one, none of these are phones, they all say gray. Here's a couple more phones again. So we created this new field. Now what are we going to do with it? I'm going to drag it onto color. Whoops, that's subcategory. I want subcategory color. And now this one is a different color than everything else. Tableau isn't smart enough to know that gray means gray. We can go change colors. Just change this one to gray. And we created our first ever if statement. Any questions on the if?
Can I see the formula again?
Yes.
Oh, we didn't need it. So I'm turning orange.
Yeah. So really, this is, you can really put whatever you want in here. These don't necessarily mean blue or gray. I'm just calling them blue or gray. They can be blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. All they're doing is just creating two new categories, essentially a new dimension for us.
Gotcha. So
You still have to go in and say, I want this to be blue and I want this to be gray.
Gotcha.
Oh, okay.
So you're creating
for the
categories.
color field we just made, it has to go in the color mark.
Yep.
That's what.
There you go.
Back to your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
If then else and never change. That's the formula.
Yep. So we could do let's do another quick example. Let's say we have, this is something that we've done in the past. Trying to think of the right way to do this. Oh, actually, hold on. Let me see. I think I may have this in the PowerPoint. Let's just do order ID or something. Let's use our nice profit margin field we just created. Now see how some of these we have negative numbers. Here are some we have positive numbers. Say we wanted to create, we wanted to color this green and red or something. I'm just kind of using colors because that's an easy one to visualize. We can go into here and we could say, let's call this profit margin color. Let's make this big. If the sum, essentially this is the measure that we're wanting to measure, right? Sum of plain profit margin. That's what we are showing in our chart. So we just want to say if what we're showing in our chart is greater than 0, then good. Oops, God, good. Else, bad, end. So before we had looked at like if a text equals a different text, here we're looking at, hey, if what we're measuring here is greater than or less than 0. Same thing, we hit OK. We can drag this onto the color now. And now you can see we have different colors for if they're good or bad. Same thing as before, though, you'd really need to go in here and say good, green, bad, red. And now they're colored based on a measure, as opposed to before we had done an if-else statement based on a dimension here.
Did I miss where we put the good and the bad in the data?
So we created the good and the bad in the data. That did not exist before. And then through this calculated field that we just created, this now returns good or bad based on if it's greater than or less than 0. And we actually created this field in the data as well, too. So now we're creating fields off of our fields. So again, if you go back to our data source, here's our regular data. You now see that we have, here's our profit margin fields that we created. Here's our subcategory field that we created. Here's our profit margin color field that we created. So every row now has a good or a bad.
So this might be a stupid. Oh, was somebody asking a question? I can't hear.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this might be stupid, but so did we put the word good or bad like in the data? Like, could we have used yes or no, or did it do that itself?
Nope, we did that ourselves. So using, whoops, wrong one. This profit margin color, same thing as like kind of that last example. We could really put whatever we want in here. My name is Charlie, and this is going to be ASDF. Now, based on that if-else statement, gosh dang it, sorry. If the sum of the profit margin, which we created right here, sum of profit margin, if it's greater than 0, return my name is Charlie, else return ASDF. So the ones that are greater than 0 are going to return this, else they're going to return ASDF. So if we look at what we just created, now in the data, we have this profit margin color column, And you can see for every row, right, this one's greater than 0, 16, 30, 47. Those are all returning that. -40, that's less than 0. So it's not greater than 0. So it would fall in the else part of the if statement, return ASDF. So then all we're doing is just with those new colors that we created, or this new field that we created, we just drug that onto the color, and then just went in and changed the colors to be green and red. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was. It just threw me off because, like, how does it know if it's good or bad? Well, it doesn't. We just put that in there.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so we can do one more step in if statements. And I don't want to get too convoluted, but I do think that these are going much better than the summed profit margin. So we're going to double down here. We can also add in multiple ifs, or multiple things to check inside of one single if statement. So the typical one is if something, then something else something. We can change that to if the sum of profit margin is greater than 0, then let's change this back to good. Something called an else if. So this is going to check, is exactly like an if. You're combining an if and an else. So instead of before, if this isn't true, if sum of profit margin, if that's greater than 0, we know what we're going to return, good. Otherwise, everything that's not greater than 0, everything is getting tossed in that else. And say we want to add multiple conditions. So we would combine our if and our else into a else if, and it'll make sense in a second. Let's do sum plain profit margin is greater than, if is greater than, let's go less than -100. But those are percentages, sorry. So that'd be -1. Then really bad. And I'll walk through this in a second. Else bad. I'll pull that back up in a second. So now we have, let's go good, let's go bad. Before it was just if it's greater than 0, return good. Else, everything else that's not greater than 0. So everything on this side of the line, return bad. However, maybe this one's only -25. This one's only -70. I really want to highlight the ones that are way less than 0. -265, -316. That's where we can add in multiple conditions to our if else statement. So let's go through this one by one next to our example here. If it's greater than 0, good. So you can see everything on the greater than 0 line is green. Else, and instead of just tossing everything into one else, we're saying else, again, if. So if this is greater than 0, good. Else, if it's less than -1, really bad. And then anything that's not either greater than 0 or less than -1, return else bad. So this is what's going to catch everything else. And if I wanted to, I could do literally a million of these and check as many different things as I wanted. If it's this, else if it's this, else if it's this, and you can go on and so forth. As many different conditions as you want to bring in. I'll show it one different way using the bar chart because I think this one may be a little easier to understand. So this is our subcategory color that we had talked through. We're saying if the subcategory equals phones, then let's go blue. And instead of coloring everything else gray, we'll go else if subcategory equals chairs, then green. See, I can add in another one too. Else if subcategory equals copiers, then red. And then I can end it with just a classic catch-all. So everything else, red. So let's go through this one by one. If the subcategory is phones, then return blue. Else, if the subcategory equals chairs, return green. Else, if subcategory equals copiers, return red. Else, gray. So now, right, our raw data looks like this, where phones returns blue. None of these. Phones return gray. Chairs returns green. So then we can go in and just match the colors that we wanted them to be. And now I've highlighted 3 different things and kept everything else as gray. So there's tons and tons and tons of different use cases for if-else statements. I'd say it's probably the most used. You're going to start finding different use cases for it. Probably the most used calculated field that I work with. And the really nice thing about this too is, like, if you guys have a good understanding of this, once you get onto like the SQL course, you'll go through the same sort of thing. Once you go onto like the Python course, if you want to do that, you'll go through the same sort of thing. The same syntax and logic is going to be the same, or pretty much exactly the same, across multiple different things that you're going to cover in whatever track that you're currently on. All right. Good news is we already covered date diffs last week, but I am going to go through those again and maybe show a couple different breakouts of how we want to do that. In our data set here, let's just pull in, we'll just do this. I guess we only have 2 dates. So let's go ahead and just create the same one that we did last week. So create a calculated field. We're going to call this days to ship. And let's go date diff. And remember, we need to give it, it's going to give us the prompts of the different parameters that it needs. So the start date, the first one it wants is the date part. So we're just going to go day. The next one is the order date. And then the last one, the end date, will be the ship date. So this is our new calculated field. And again, kind of using the same thought track that we've used up to this point in the class. You can now see in our data, we have a calculated field called, what was it, days to ship, right here. So for every row, here's the order date, shipped on November 8th, or is ordered on November 8th, shipped on November 11th. That took 3 days. We can go ahead and let's just look at something simple like category and where is it? Days to ship. And then let's change it from a sum to an average. So all these are pretty close. Office supplies take a little bit longer on average to ship. Technology is the shortest, but all about 4 days. Let's say we wanted to change this from days, just to use another example, to like hours or something. We can go in, edit days to ship, and we can change this to hour. And then just so it's not confusing, let's rename it hours to ship. And now you can see on average, these take about 95 hours, which makes sense because it's the same data just showed as hours instead of days. So that's the date diff. We covered it last week, so hopefully straightforward. Yes.
What is the startup week from?
Yeah, great question. So You don't need it. In here, so the question was, what is the start of week prompt? If I were to, oh, it shows it right here, right? So the date part is an hour, start date is the order date, end date is the ship date. Then after that, you can see in brackets, it has start of week. So that is going to be anything inside of square brackets is an optional parameter, so you don't need it. But what it's essentially saying is, if we were to do, what's a good way to explain this? If I wanted to go outside of a typical calendar week, and if you guys are feeling overwhelmed or confused, ignore everything I'm about to say because it doesn't matter. But if I wanted to go outside of a typical calendar week where Sunday is the start of the week and then a week later is another Sunday, and say I want to consider anything that goes from Sunday, if I want to consider Monday the start of my week. And so if it goes from Sunday to Monday, that's technically a week apart. Instead of a calendar day, which is like 7 days, that's when you'd use it. I've never used it in my life. So I was going to see if it had.
Which formula was this? Date start?
Yeah. So the date diff.
Oh, date diff.
Yeah. So if you hover over, you know how it has these little prompts of everything else.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. One nice thing that Tableau does have, though, is if you're ever curious of like what you need or examples, if you expand this little sidebar, you can just search for
Yeah, it's super handy.
the thing you had. So it says, if start of week is omitted, the week start date is determined by the start date configured for the data source, which just means our normal Sunday start date, like we use in our normal calendar. But really good question. I wish I had a better answer, but I just never use it. So
Yeah.
okay, how are we feeling so far? Good. I have one more tricky one, one more easy one, then we're done. Trying to figure out. Yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. So we had talked about calculated fields. We've talked about level of detail stuff. By default, Tableau, the level of detail that you bring in and that you're showing is always going to be at just whatever you're aggregating by, right? Right now it's at the category level. If I were to bring in subcategory, now the level of detail is at the subcategory level. That's what we're aggregating by. If I were to bring in order ID or our individual rows, that's the level of detail that we're aggregating by. We can actually control that as well too, which helps us have some really cool capabilities inside of Tableau. So for an example, if I were to bring in category and subcategory, and then let's bring in my sales here. This is, again, the level of detail that we're looking at here is at the subcategory level, right? Because that's the deepest level that we have here. We're grouping by furniture, but when I'm showing sum of sales, that's the sum of sales for bookcases, for chairs, for furnishings, for tables. Say someone asks you, what percentage of our furniture sales came from bookcases, right? You would know that this is how much came from bookcases, but you wouldn't know how much came from furniture unless you took like 114,000 divided by 742,000 and figured out that percentage. We can actually show not just the level of detail that we have up in our rows from our dimensions, but we can show it side by side with our furniture dimension as well too, to show the sum of sales for both of these categories, which will allow us to interact with them between the two. So let me go through the syntax for it, and then we'll pull it in and we'll talk about what it means. So we are going to fix. We don't want the level of detail to be whatever is shown in Tableau. We want to fix the level of detail regardless of what we currently have as our dimensions up there. So we're going to type in fixed. Hit tab over and it'll automatically give you a little squirrely bracket and a space there. Then we want to tell it what level of detail we want it aggregated by. So regardless of what we're showing, if it's category, if it's subcategory, if it's region, no matter what we have up there in pills, we want this fixed by category. And then we are going to tell it, then we hit a little colon. So that's all we need so far. Fixed category, colon. And then what do we want to aggregate? We're going to do the sum of sales. And then hit your little curly bracket to close it. Whoops. Parentheses and close it. So this is actually showing, what this is saying is exactly what we would typically do in Tableau. Typically we'd pull in, I'm going to save this. What we're saying right now is for the subcategory, show me the sum of sales, right? That's what we're currently showing. What this calculation is saying is regardless of what we drag and drop across the data set or across the visual here, we're saying no matter what this field is going to be by category, show me the sum of sales. So we're just going to call this sales by category. What does the error say if you like hover over the bottom?
Empty name is not allowed. Oh, I don't even think name didn't come.
Oh, just name
Sorry,
it.
never mind.
All right, so what does this look like now? If we pull in, let's get category and subcategory up here. So this is what we're used to working with by subcategory, the level of detail of sales. If we pull in sales by category, right beside it here, let's do our measure names as columns. Hold on, I'm overcomplicating stuff. Give me the table. There we go. And again, apologize if I went too fast here. I have sales on the text. I have sales by category on the text. And then I just showed me a table here. So now our sales column here is exactly what we had before. For each subcategory, here's our total sales. I have this new field, which looks weird, called sales by category. And this is ignoring everything that we have up here across our rows, across our columns, across our subcategories. And it's forcing it, it's fixing it to show the sum of sales by category. Does this at least make sense conceptually what I'm trying to do here? Head nods, okay. So now we can work with these two together. We can build other stuff off of them. We have this brand new data point, which is for the first time ever, not by like a row by row level. We fixed it. We forced it to be aggregated at a level of detail outside of our data. It's like we're getting into some serious like interstellar type calculations here where this is outside of anything we've seen before. So let's say we wanted to do, let's create a new calculated field. We're getting calculated field happy tonight. Let's call this percent of category. And this is just going to be sales divided by sales by sales by category. So we're going to take this column, divide it by this new calculated field that we just made, hit OK. And then let's go ahead and just drag that underneath in the measure values as well. And then I think this was happening to you, Melinda, earlier. It's showing 0 right now because we need to change it to a %. So hit the little drop down, default properties, number format, %. And voila. Now what this is doing is if we were to take 114,000 divided by 742, that's 15.48%. So this is the % of this total sales by category field that we just created for each one of these subcategories. So if we were to like hover and add these all up, the sum of the measure values equals 1 or 100%. So now we know exactly what % of each of our subcategories make up the sales for our category. Really cool. Yes, you're right.
Do you have to put the sales by category column in there?
No, like I love it. Why have it in there? Right? It's not making any sense at all. This is all we really need to know is that 114,000 makes up about 15% of our furniture sales. Yeah, and if we look, I've mentioned like we're fixing it, forcing it to be at that level of detail no matter what. If we were to look at like our raw data, where is it? Sales by, oh, bless you.
And you could do a percentage of total sales as well, right?
Yes, you could.
Some sales.
It may not actually populate. I bet fixed table calculations don't populate in here. But to prove out the example, like say we did something like, I don't know. I mean, really, we could go ahead and bring in like order ID at all members. And then let's bring in that sales by category field again. Right now we're looking at typically the level of detail we'd be looking at specific orders. Doesn't matter. That's still going to show the 742,000 for bookcases, the 719. So just really emphasizing that fixed, regardless of what we do in our chart here, is still going to be fixed across. So this specific order ID made up 361 sales, which is about 0.04% of our technology sales. For the remote folks, does that make sense? Any questions there? Cool. All right, that one, I didn't give you guys enough credit. That went much easier than I thought it was going to. We already did that. Last one, and then we'll take a break, is a window calculation. So let's go ahead and pull in our order dates. I think it makes sense to do it in columns here. And let's pull in our, let's just stick with sales. And again, let's make this a table so that's a little easier. So we have 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and the total amount of sales that we did every single year. Say someone asked me what was the difference between what we did in 2017 to 2016. Again, you could look at what we did here. You could manually subtract it here. But say you wanted to do that same thing for like months and you have a lot more, right? So we are going to do something called a lookup or a window calc. We're going to create a calculated field. And similarly to like that fixed calculation, we are going to bend the laws of what Tableau does by default and force it to do what we want it to do. And again, these are not Tableau specific things. These all have applications in no matter what data viz software you're using, or if you're to do something in Python or R or anything like that, or like we use DBT as like our data engineering software, all the same stuff. So we're going to call this last year's sales. Now the syntax for this is lookup because essentially what we're going to ask it to do is look up what something was in a previous, whether a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it doesn't really matter. So we have to tell it what we want it to look up, and we're going to say we want it to look up the sum of sales. And then we're just going to go, whoa, what is this? Sorry. The offset we're going to say is -1. So what that's going to do is it's going to look up the sum of sales 1 back. It'll make more sense, so I drag it in here. Bring that out of the text. There we go. So we have our sales, sum of sales, just like we did previously. And now we've said look up 1 back what was our sales. So you can see 484 in 2014. Then in 2015, we had 470, but we also have this new field now that's 484, which was last year's sales. 2016, we had 609. We have this new field, 470, which was last year's sales, so on and so forth. So in order to, similarly to how we did with that fixed calculation, is now we can work with these new data sets or data points. So we can create a calculated field, and let's just call this year over year change. My naming conventions are awful. Let's just go sales minus last year's sales. Oh, we're getting an error. That is because, gosh, this is an annoying error to have to explain. So it cannot mix aggregates and non-aggregates. So what that's saying is last year's sales, we're already taking, right, if we look at how we created that, we're taking the sum of sales. So that means that's an aggregated function. However, sales is just a default data point. So it's not aggregated right now. So when I create my calculated field, one second, I'll finish this out and I'll pause. I would need to do sum of sales, which makes sense. That's what we're showing here, right? Sum of sales minus last year's sales. And now we get the calculation is valid. So if we bring that in now, we have, this is the difference. So in 2015, we shrunk, right? We went from 484 to 470. We have last year's sales, 484. We have 470. So we have negative 13,000. Then we grew. Then we grew again. And to your point, Melinda, we don't really need to show this anymore. We just have what our sales were and if we went up or down previously. Okay, question.
Go back into the YOY sales that you just did.
Yep.
It just came out a little fast for me.
Yeah, that's on me because I messed up the first time.
The other one that had the error is.
Yeah.
Just get rid of it.
Yep. So yeah, when I got the error before, I was trying to say what's my sales minus last year's sales, but that's not really what we're showing here. We're trying to show the sum of sales minus that calculated field I just made, which was last year's sales. So you need to make sure you're typing in exactly what you're trying to measure here. Put this back in here.
I think I'm having a parentheses error.
Okay.
Yeah. For the last year's sales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it should just be lookup parentheses, sum of sales.
Go to what was the year over year?
Yep,
I'm
so
sorry, last year. Okay, no, that was year over year sales.
Getting it? Let's just real quick, last year's sales. You can look up really whatever you want. In this example, I did -1 to get just last year's sales. Notice that 2014 doesn't have one because obviously there's nothing before it, but then 2015 has 2014s, so on and so forth. If I were to type in -2, I am now looking up 2 back. So I'm going 2016, not this one, but the one before, comes from 2014. Here's the lookup 2 back. I could go into, I think it will be embarrassing if I can't. If I were to actually type in 1 instead of -1, it will look up 1 forward. So this is next year's sales. So obviously for this specific example, last year's sales and the year-over-year change, it makes sense to just do a -1. But if for some reason you did want to say, yeah, I mean, there's use cases for everything. That's the functionality, the flexibility that they give you to work with.
So I was expecting that to work like a VLOOKUP.
No, not quite. Because it's not, a VLOOKUP would be like matching, looking up and finding where those are equal and matching them across. This is more of like the closest like syntax would be like a lag function. If you ever do like a lag in like SQL or Python or anything, where it's saying whatever the previous value was, or a lead function would be whatever the next value is, grabbing it there. And again, we can, right now we're aggregated by years, but like if we wanted to do months, everything broke. Sales, last year's sales. We do the same thing by month. It's really just taking whatever the sum of sales is that we're looking at and looking up 1 back.
Okay.
Cool. I feel like that hour flew by. That was a fast hour. Let's take another quick 10-minute break. I'm going to get my banner going again on the stream. Let's come back at 8:13. All right, let's go ahead and get going here. We're actually pretty close to done. I'm going to show just a couple more things. The homework for tonight is very, very, very easy. It's essentially just create a single new calculated field that we haven't covered. So it won't take long, I promise. I wanted to go through just a few more examples really quick just to show out kind of how powerful these are. And when you guys are getting ready to do your homework or assignment, whatever you want to call it, again, I'm just really going through and I'm clicking. What I was just doing is going through and just literally looking at all of these. I mean, there's probably 100 or so not a ton. And just like looking into like what they do. The definitions here are pretty straightforward. I think something to call out is that you can create calculated fields off of like a measure that you create, sum of sales. You could create that same thing in a calculated field, right? Like sum of sales. Like that's what we've talked about before. Another thing I wanted to call out was, and I mentioned that because as you're going through here, you'll see things like average and sum, and you're like, aren't those just normal aggregations? The answer is yes. If you get tired of like typing things out and hitting tab, you can actually just drag them right over onto your calculated field table here, which is kind of cool. I don't do it a whole lot, but if you wanted to, you could. You can also drag over aggregations that you already have. So like if I had last year's sales in here, I can drag that over as a field, or if I want to drag over some sales. So you can do different things like that. The other kind of cool thing that I actually just learned as I was going through here is they have this function called name full user. We'll go username first, which doesn't take any parameters or anything like that. It's just username, and that returns the username for the current user. This is the Tableau server, Tableau cloud username when the user is signed in. Otherwise, is the local or network name on the Tableau user desktop. So I created that, never seen it before. I pulled it up here, and now all of a sudden I have this new field called Charlie.Burtwhistle, which is kind of cool. I think actually, let's test this real quick. I'm going to publish something. I'm just going to publish just this sheet. And I'm going to send the link out in Slack. I'm wondering if when you guys sign in and look at it, if it will be my name or your name. Uh-oh. You're attempting to publish one or more user filters. Okay. So it won't let you publish, I guess. And I don't know why it's showing my. Did I change that username? Email. Maybe it won't let you publish. If it has your personal stuff in there, which I guess is a nice safety measure. Yep. Okay. So on Tableau Public, it won't let you do that. But we actually use that in Tableau Server sometimes. When we are creating like a rep specific dashboard or something, we'll have it when they log in, it'll actually show their name. So calculated fields, what else did I want to cover here? Oh, I was going to do like a date add. Actually, I'm going to save these. I'm not going to cover any more. I'll let you guys do some exploring on your own. Find ones that you think are cool. Literally create one field, create one chart, make it look pretty, publish to Tableau Public, and we'll call it good for homework for the night. Yeah.
How do I say, so I want to make sure that all of these workbooks are saved. Do I have to save them one at a time to Tableau Public or put them in a dashboard?
No, great question. So when you, let me delete the things that have my username in there. When you hit save and you go out here, it will save the entire workbook. So you're asking if it, like, to make sure it saves all the individual sheets.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're just going to call this night for 2024 exam. This is actually really annoying. And I've been meaning to look into if there's a way to change the default of this, because a few of you have already asked me about it. When you publish it and save it, it does actually save all those individual sheets. It just doesn't look like it. So like right now, it looks like I just saved sheet 10 because that's the only one in there. If I go to settings and I go show sheets, they're all in there. Why it doesn't do that by default, I don't know. Yeah, Sally showed Tableau sheets by the seashore.
It's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. I'm going to show, just because we have a little extra time, and the assignment is really easy, I'm going to show one thing that we didn't get to that's kind of not super related to what we did in class tonight, but is also kind of really cool. I'm going to just create something really easy. Let's just go category and our sum profit margin, for instance. That's not going to work. Let's go subcategory. Okay, so we have some negative numbers in there. We've talked about the format tab a little bit. And again, this isn't a super big thing, but if I want to, you can change the format. I think I've showed you guys before how you can do the custom and do like year, or month, year for different things. You can also add in, and I'm going to send this in the chat for you guys to use. I use this a lot, is like up arrows and down arrows. So if I want the number format to include those arrows, I can type in essentially whatever emojis or hex codes or images or whatever you want to include. You can have this essentially saying use this image for if it's a positive number, use this image if it's a negative number. And now I have down arrows for negative. So like if I was looking at that year over year stuff, and I think I deleted that sheet, you can change the format of those. Remember before we had changed the format for like our order date.
Was it very step to that?
I'll show it again in a second here. Right, we had done the same thing. We had gone format here and gone into custom and gone month, year. Whoops. Year. Right, we've done that before. This is essentially doing that same thing, but dragging in another kind of helpful tips or trick of formatting these things. I will send this formula exactly in the Slack channel right now. I can never remember it. I have to look it up every time. So now you guys will have it forever. So that concludes lesson 4, night 4. We'll use the rest of the time. Literally, only homework assignment is create a new calculated field that we didn't cover in class, and make a chart out of it. I would use the sample superstore data. There's no sense overcomplicating things if you don't want to or need to. Publish it to Tableau Public. Send me the URL, and I will pick on different people next time, I promise, to present their calculated field that they found. Any questions about what we covered tonight before we officially kind of segue into the assignment portion? Because I know some people will wrap up sooner, and if you want to head out, you can. Cool. Well, raise your hand or chime in with questions as they come up, and I'll walk around. A little preview for next class. Remember, like in elementary school and college and any stuff, they'd show you like a really, really complicated way of doing stuff, and then the next class they'd be like, this is a really easy way of doing it. That's what we're going to be doing next class. So all the window calcs and calculated fields and things like that, it's really important to understand how that works in the background, so you understand what you're doing. And when people ask you for profit margin, average profit margin, you understand what you're calculating. There are actually drag and drop ways to do those same exact things in Tableau. So that's what we'll be covering next class. So it'll be really easy and really fun, and you guys will understand what you're doing a lot better. Otherwise, thank you. Do the assignment real quick, head out for the night. Great class.
this it's already aggregated thing, and they're both already aggregated.
Gotcha. So the correlation function needs two non-aggregated fields to display the correlation between them. So this average diversity perception, is that one that you made? Is there a field that's just diversity perception?
No, because I wanted there's like individual items. I wanted to know what's underscore on these individual items are. So my app, maybe this is aggregated at the wrong level.
Do just the diversity perception, just perception.
Like just one of the measures.
So that should work. And if you think about it, it makes sense because grab that whiteboard, right? For the correlation to work, you would need, like, here's all your data points scattered, and it would tell you if they're correlated or not correlated. If you're just aggregating them into two averages, it would just be essentially two data points. I guess it would just be one, it would be the average and the average there, so it can't give you a correlation of the aggregate of them. It needs all the data points to tell you what the correlation is.
Okay, so I aggregated these wrong. Because what I'm interested in is each individual's average diversity perception.
Okay, so the data set is like an individual, and then two of their.
Yeah, so the row level data is the individual, and then I want their average score across these items.
Oh,
But
okay.
what I did was I did the average, total average of all of them.
Okay.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, so do go into that calculate field you made. So I think is just or average. Okay. So go ahead and get rid of the average. And then let's just do not even the same thing. So then this will give you
The row level.
the row level average without doing an aggregate. Nice. Okay. So that's what we wanted, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that tells you the correlation right there. So there. Maybe you can also do, if you want to visualize it slightly, right? That's your new sheet. And just double click your diversity or drag it over. Yeah, if you double click it automatically pops it. And then let's drag the name or something. So this is showing for this new ID your average scores that you created.
Okay.
So go over to analytics now. Do a track line. So it's slightly different way to show it. I can't remember. So that's just a slightly different. It could just be a different correlation calculation, but essentially it's showing the same thing. It says this would be if it's strong correlated, negative correlation. This is just showing one specific number as opposed to a chart lines, but it's kind of the same results.
Okay.
But it'd be cool to look at those other two things that you had, or like combinations of the two things, because maybe some are more strongly correlated than the other. But like one would be perfectly correlated, one negative one would be perfectly not. I'm gonna run to the restroom real quick. I'll be right back.
Hey, Charlie, quick question for you. Hey, Charlie, are you able to hear me?
Yep, I got you.
Sweet. I got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
When trying to do if and else if calculation, I'm attempting to do something where if the sales is less than a certain number, it'll be made this color.
Yep.
But if greater than that value, but less than a, for example, if it's less than 2,000, it's red. If it's greater than 2,000 but less than 6,000, it's this color, and so on. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you'd want to do, can you still see my screen all right?
Yes, I can.
Cool. Let's do let's get some example data in there.
Oh wait, I lied. Looks like we're frozen.
Oh,
Sorry about
okay,
that.
no worries. Give me 1 second. Okay, got me now?
Yep, now we're good.
Okay, so we want to do something like if sales, let's do if sum of sales is greater than, for this example that I'm doing with, let's go like 300,000. And great. Else if sum of sales. So you want to do like greater than like greater than 2,000.
Yeah.
But
So
less than.
basically, yeah, I'm trying to go up in increments. So starting at if it's less than this number, it's a color. But if it's less than, for example, less than 2,000, this color. If it's greater than 2,000, but then less than, for example, 6,000, then it'll be made this color.
Gotcha.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. So we could do, the easiest way to do it is if you just put it in order that you're trying to go. So if we want to do greater than 100,000, good. Else, I'm going to type this out, then I'll walk through it. So,
Okay.
Sales. So if we go just, let me make this bigger, kind of logically in order here, anything that's greater than 300,000 is going to get captured and go away. So really what we're saying in this second one, even without necessarily saying it, is if it's greater than 100,000, it also has to be less than 300,000, or else it would have already got captured by here, right?
Okay.
And if it's greater than 0, that means that it has to be less than 300,000 and I guess less than 100,000. Otherwise it got there. So even though we're only saying greater than this, going in order. Now, if you didn't go in order, right? And I'll show you what I mean just in case. So let's say we started with, we wanted to go backwards here and say sum of sales, if it's greater than 0, then okay. If I try to go then and go in and do else if sum of sales is greater than 100,000, then good. This would never work, right? Because everything is greater than 0. So it would get captured before it even got to that second option. So if I did go in this order, which I wouldn't recommend, but just to show out the functionality, you could do an and thing, sum sales less than 100,000. Then okay. So you can put an and in there to say it has to be greater than this and greater than that to be classified as okay. And then here you'd say greater than 100,000 and sum of sales less than 300,000, then good, and then go down that way. But if you're just like strategic about the order that you type them in, you can save yourself some ands and just let it kind of organically filter down.
Yeah, I was doing it starting at the lowest, going to the top, going to the highest.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense now. And then
So yeah,
the ands was kind of how I was doing it in my head, but now that you've explained it, how you basically do it, the higher numbers first.
Yep, just kind of like a funnel concept and let it funnel yourself down. But there are going to be, it's a good concept to know because like sometimes you won't be working with numerical values. Maybe you'd want to say like if category equals chairs and subcategory equals recliners or whatever. It's good to know how to do the and things. You can also do the same thing with ors and or, which we didn't cover tonight, but that would be the syntax for typing those out.
Sure. There we go.
Cool.
Okay. Sweet. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And apologies that I haven't been able to make it to class in person. With my work schedule, it doesn't really line up too well.
All good. All good. It actually, it worked great having the chat going tonight. That was super easy to get kind of quick, immediate feedback and go back and forth.
Good. I'm glad. All right. Awesome, man. Then I'm gonna call it a night. I think that's all the questions I got for you.
Cool. Sounds good. See you, Connor.
See ya. Take care.
Bye. All right.
Do you want one sheet or like a dash?
One sheet's fine.
Well, I made 3 calculated fields, so I just.
Yeah, tell us in the dash.